Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Creative Noelan podcast. As artists, we're often caught in this tug of war between our passion and the practicality of making a living. We get told that if we're serious about our art, then we'll just have to suffer for it. Well, what if instead of choosing between creativity and business, we could actually have both? In today's episode, I speak to John Sewell, the mind behind Cosimo.Art, a platform built to help artists, especially those just starting out, connect directly with buyers without any of the middlemen, any of the high commissions, or any of the traditional gallery gatekeepers. It's also a place for community, for growth, and for turning your creative passion into a sustainable way of life. Cosimo also provides practical tools to help artists at all stages of their journey, including how to market yourself, how to price your artwork, and, maybe most importantly, how to believe in the value of what you create. John and the team at Cosimo are challenging the starving artist narrative and believe that artists already have everything they need to thrive as entrepreneurs. We don't have to trade in our creative integrity for commercial success. We just need to rethink how we approach the business side of our art. So, if you've ever wondered how to sell your art online or how to balance the business of art without losing your creative spark, then this episode's for you. Let's get into it. John, thank you for being on the Creative Noelan podcast.
No, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
You say that now, we might not be at the end of it. Let's get straight into it. What do you think the biggest misconceptions that artists have about selling their work?
I think the biggest thing that artists don't realise is that they, as artists or creatives generally, are inherently entrepreneurial in their way of thinking and kind of engaging with the world. And so the gap between that kind of business mindset and being able to put your work out there in a way that, you know, you can make a living from it, I don't think it's as big a gap as people sometimes think. And I think a lot of the time, the reason that gap exists is just because people aren't given the right framework or the right kind of, you know, nudges in the right direction to open up that kind of that way of thinking that I think is inherent within a lot of artists and creatives that will make it so they can engage in the market in that way.
And what do you think some of those attributes, those entrepreneurial attributes that you think creatives have, but perhaps they don't recognize in themselves? What can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, definitely. So the thing that I think is the starting point, and the way I kind of talk about this is that artists have a way of looking at the world. And if you just think about how you make a piece of art and just take a drawing, for example, what you're doing is you're looking at something, you're then synthesizing it in your head and then reproducing that on paper, typically with a bit of a kind of spin on it that's showcasing a little bit of you, and you're representing that to the world in a kind of, it's not exactly what is there, but you're re-showing it to people. And what entrepreneurs are doing quite a lot of the time when they're starting for business or looking for a business opportunity is the same thing. They're looking at the world as it is. They're then taking that in and analysing it and going, this is how I see the world. And then they're putting it out there and then selling that vision to people of what they think the world can be or is. So that kind of analytical, deconstructive process, I think, is something that artists are very good at. And it's also what entrepreneurs are very good at. And I think the difference is only that entrepreneurs are starting from a point often of thinking about making that into a business or monetizing that or whatever. But it's the same thing is happening. And the same ways of looking at the world are shared between both kinds of people. So I think that's where the biggest kind of similarity is.
How do you think that artists can sort of shift their mindset to be a little bit more entrepreneurial in that sense when it comes to the selling of art? And obviously, with what you do, which we'll get into much more in a minute, you've got that kind of expertise and presumably roster of artists that you've understood and learnt from.
Yeah.
So what is it about artists that you think, or what attributes do you think that artists need to adopt more of in that entrepreneurial sense?
I think, again, it's not necessarily that they need to adopt it. I think it's just they need to take what they already have and put it into a different context. So if you think about it, artists are very good risk takers a lot of the time. I don't think you can be a creative person without having some element of kind of being open to risk. But I think the flip is, it's one thing to take the risk to create something and share that with people. But then if you can get that far, then you just need to take another risk and like ask people to buy it, those kind of things. Some really straightforward things, I think. But it's just taking that mindset and skill set that artists have and then just pushing it a little bit further. I think artists sometimes feel kind of penned in, or like they're not confident necessarily in those things. But I think a lot of the time it can just be as simple as, and it sort of sounds a bit flippant, but like just like literally just give it a go and ask the questions, take those risks, because that's what entrepreneurs are very good at, taking risks. And they'll ask for opportunities. They'll create their own opportunities. But I think, like I say, that artists have that within them. It's just sort of pushing over the edge to get it out, I think.
And do you think that's a throwback to the inherent starving artist that we've all grown up with? I've spoken about this a lot in the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, don't go into the arts because you won't make any money that way.
Yeah.
But actually, we see artists these days making very good money, and there's never really been a better time, which sort of leads me nicely on to talk to me about Cosimo.Art, John.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think that was one of the reasons I've ended up down this path, is because when I was at school, was thinking about doing art at university and becoming an artist. And I decided against it because I was like, I don't want to live my life worrying about making a living. So I did art history, which was probably no better from a kind of professional perspective. But yeah, I think so there's this kind of the starving artist thing. Just to come back on that a little bit, I think that is it. It's like that's what is presented as being what you should be as an artist, but not like that doesn't actually have to be the case. And also this idea that all the best artists in history were starving artists is largely not true. And even those that were, to some degree, they were still kind of, they were okay. They had, they had other things.
This is a bit of a tangent, but can you give us in your knowledge, who's of your art history knowledge, who's the most famous artist that is perceived as being
Van Gogh is the one that everyone always goes like, oh, he never sold any paintings during his life and all this sort of stuff. And it's not true that he didn't sell any paintings till he died, because his brother was his art dealer and he sold his paintings. And he wasn't necessarily recognized like as we would now look at David Hockney or something like that. But he was a pretty well-known painter who sold some stuff and he did okay. And I think, what I think most artists don't realize is that like just doing okay from your art and living. I was listening to Jerry Salt's book, How to Be an Artist, recently. And I think it was brilliant what you said there about like the real commodity as an artist is time, because you want time to make your art. Like that's why you're doing it, is you just want to do it. Like you're not doing it because you want to sell it or make a living from it. You're doing it because you want to make the art. And then the way you do that is get people to pay you to make the art, so you've got the time to make the art, right? And that you might, as an artist, okay, you might not be the most wealthy person in the world, but you'll be doing something you love. You'll be meeting and connecting with loads of interesting people. You'll get to, go and see interesting and cool things and places. And I think, and then that's the upside. You're not necessarily going to be David Hockney making millions of pounds from your artworks, but like that's a success. And
it's your perception of wealth though as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
I always hark back to a famous Bob Marley quote where it's like, well, wealth to everyone else means money, and to him it's just exactly those things: satisfaction, happiness, creativity, all those things. So, John, tell me, we've gone around about the houses. Talk to me. What is? I mean, I've done an intro, obviously, but talk to me about Cosimo in your words, and the sort of a bit of the, sounds a bit cliche, but the why behind it.
Yeah. So Cosimo is a marketplace for early career and emerging artists, and our whole principle is around helping artists make their work more accessible and affordable, and help them to keep more of their sales so they can make more art, and that's the kind of aim. So artists can sign up and sell for free. We don't take the 30 to 50% commission that galleries take. There's no commission for the artists. The buyers pay for the shipping, and we have a bit of a kind of buyer protection fee within that. So that's, people go, so how do you make your money? That's part of that. But then we also have a subscription so artists can upgrade to access the full features of the platform, and some more kind of access to learning and opportunities through the subscription. So that's, practically what it is. It's a marketplace, a place for artists to put their work, to share their work and sell their work online. We've got over 1,000 artists signed up from all over the UK, and we've a brilliant community of really talented artists. I think that's one of the things that I love about it, actually, is that we've got a bunch of on the platform and part of the community who, I know are super talented, and most people would see as super talented, but they might still not be able to get onto other platforms or into galleries just yet because their career's not in the right place. But we're kind of able to give them a home and to help them sell. And that's really cool and exciting and fun as well for me to get to know those artists.
And how does that work? Is it open to anybody, or do people have to apply and there's like a curation process? Because quality control is what I'm sort of thinking.
No, so it's an interesting one. We're currently open to all artists, and I think that there's a real kind of, there's two sides to this. One is a kind of fundamental thing of, if we've built the platform to try and make it as accessible and transparent and open to as many people as possible. And I feel like if we start curating people out of that, then we're on a road to closing off the audience, and then you have to start picking a certain type of artist because that's what the audience comes for. And I think that can get challenging. So at the moment we're fully open to any artist. There are a few parameters that you have to be in the UK at the moment. Your work has to fit within the kind of painting, print, sculpture categories that we have, and the content.
So go on, just elaborate because I know mostly creatives are going to be listening to this, and they're probably going, "Wow, a platform that I can just upload my art with. That's amazing." Yeah. So what are the parameters within those? What were the mediums that people can...
So we've got painting, print, both kind of digital and more handmade prints, I suppose you might call it. Photography, sculpture, drawing. We've got a real range, and I think similarly we're trying to keep it as broad as possible in that sense. I think the main, there is an element of, we do differentiate from craft. So we don't want to become Etsy, because I think that's one of the things where Etsy went wrong for artists, was it became difficult for artists to fit in because it became a craft platform, and then it became just a product platform. And artists, I think, need a very specific set of tools, but also people, when they're buying art, it's a very specific kind of thing they're looking for. So I think that's kind of why that's set up as it is. But ultimately, this is also with a view to the kind of long-term aim. And we've got a version of this now, but we really want to flesh this out. And we've got some really exciting projects in the works around this. But to take the role of a gallerist and a curator, the good bit they do, which is matching the potential buyer, with the artist whose work will be relevant to them, and doing that online through technology, in the same way that Spotify you click the DJ button and it tells you what music you want to listen to.
Okay, I'm going to be really, I'm going to say like AI algorithmic sort of learning of what the buyers on the site are looking for.
Yeah, basically.
Wow. Okay.
And what that will enable is you to have the way, this is exactly how I talk about it on YouTube. There's a lot of crap that you don't want to see, but you generally get shown what you're interested in. And I think with art, we collect quite a bit of information about the artworks when the artists are uploading it, and we can start to categorize it, and there's a whole bunch of parameters that we can then use to match make people with artworks. And I think the interesting thing is I think that it's not, I don't want it to become Tinder-like.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
There was a platform a little while ago. They did pretty well, and they're very similar to us. So I'm not bashing them because it didn't work out for them, but also just they were coming from the same place as us. So I think that I commend them for it. But the idea that they had was that basically you would swipe left and right with artworks you like and didn't like, and then that would create your your algorithm essentially. And I think there's an element of that. But I think when it comes to buying art, it's much more, there's so many other things going in play. Like often it'll be, I have a space on this particular wall and the room looks like this. And so I need, that's what great art consultants do, is they look at the room and go, right, that's the piece you need right there. And it's not just necessarily based on your preferences. There's a whole bunch of other parameters and criteria that kind of need to be taken into account for that. So I think, and I've got a whole bunch of ideas about how I think we can play with that and how we can make that interesting and engaging and fun for people to use. But that's ultimately, I want that experience to A, be accessible to more people so we can connect more people with more artists, and B, be done through technology and available online.
And I suppose everything is moving in that way, because obviously there's so much that goes into that with the technology of looking at rooms and color tones and palettes, or what the art buyer has liked previously.
Yeah.
Is it going to be such a case as that they'll, how it gets, you only get to see the same thing. You'll be caught in an almost art eco bubble where you never see any new styles of art because this is the only light that the algorithm learns that you like.
Yeah. I think that's, all platforms I think are trying to combat that. Some do it better than others already. And so there's, I think you've got to be a little careful on that. But I think, and I think again, this is one of the things those, some platforms make the mistake on this is thinking that people will engage with art in the way that they engage with TikTok or Instagram or whatever. I think people engage with art either because they're very specifically looking to buy art, or because they're looking to learn about art and artists, but they're not going to be browsing in the same way as you would to buy, but they're also not going to be browsing in the same way as you would on social media necessarily. I think this is something we're still working out and figuring out how that actually plays out. But
that must be quite difficult though, because the model for everything marketing these days goes back to social media, doesn't it? So,
I was talking to someone about this the other day, that there's a problem for artists and creatives, I think, of that social media has got to a point now where, particularly Instagram, which was a founding kind of point of Cosimo, was I saw loads of artists were using Instagram to promote their work, and then they would sell through their Instagram. But it would be like they'd send a PayPal link to someone, and then in those message chains, people would drop off, or it didn't feel very secure. People didn't trust it. So that kind of, Instagram was brilliant for a lot of artists for a long time. And then because of the emergence of TikTok, it's kind of become more of the content you're creating has to be content for the platform, and it has to be a certain type of content. So it can't just be, here's my painting, because Instagram will just be like, it's just a picture. People are going to maybe look at that for half a second, but they're not going to watch 10 seconds worth. So that has created a challenge for creatives, because they then have to create extra content around the content, because their content is art, right? And I often talk about this, is like a lot of artists aren't very good at writing about their work, but that's because the way they express themselves is through the visual stuff. So you might be a very good painter, but you might not be very good at making reels. And so
I can relate to that. Not being a good painter, but just like the challenge that it is to operate on social media when you know how you want to create.
It's another business essentially as well. So it's kind of how you probably have to think about it. Big companies have teams that manage that kind of content for them and put a lot of money into it. So the idea that an individual artist would have to do all that and they're probably also trying to do another job and all this sort of
and
stuff.
catch 22, before you say make it big, you can't afford the team.
Yeah,
Once you make
exactly.
it big, you've got the team, and then it's,
And then
we spoke before the podcast about how trying to promote the podcast on your own, once you've recorded it, done all the editing, done all this, it's exhausting.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a full-time job.
So I think there's something in that of trying to figure out how best to help artists engage with audiences that are interested in their work, and B, and this is something I'm really interested in, how we can use our platform to help the artists without them having to do too much work, to share those stories and to communicate about their work and to engage people.
And can you say a bit more about that? Not just obviously, so from a selling point, you talked about resources that are on the website and you trying to facilitate artists being in that better position. What sort of things, other than just you can put your art on Cosimo, and what do you guys do that can? Yeah,
well, I mean, so there's we try and create content around our artists as well to help promote them, but we're in the same position there, so it's not necessarily easy, but we try and do that as much as we can. We've done real life exhibitions, which I think is it's something you can think as a online thing that we would shy away from that, but I think that's really important, not least, again, going back to that community piece. It's nice to get people together and for our artists to meet and all that kind of thing.
And how does that work in that sense? How many artists did you say were on the platform?
Well, about 1,200.
See, that's a lot of artists.
Yeah.
And presumably you can't take work from everybody.
No. I mean, so the way we've done it before, we've done quite specific kind of curated pop-ups. And again, this is where we want to take it. We want to have big art fairs, and again, where all of our artists can come.
I was going to say, is that based on, say, you do a pop-up, say, in Manchester, because you've got 12 Manchester artists that are smashing it, or in Edinburgh, or wherever that might be?
That's how we we're obviously in Birmingham. We've done 2 in Birmingham. We did 1 in London, and they're great fun, and it's a nice way to get exposure for people. But I think there's a whole bunch of ways, like I say, around using technology. I think we're looking at some interesting stuff that I can't say too much about because I'm still figuring it out.
John. Come on, just tell us.
But using things like AR and VR and just different ways to engage people with art. I think that one of the limitations with the kind of current setup of social media and the internet more broadly is that everything is typically through your phone screen, and it's not great at actually getting the artwork across or the artist across. So yes,
art's about feeling, art's about emotion, it's about all those things. And I do feel like, I sort of agree with that in many senses, that whole aspect of it can be hugely diluted when you're just flicking through, viewing it on a screen, and you sort of like, you hear the stories of people standing in front of a Mark Rothko and suddenly bursting into tears, and you're like, wow, I mean, that's incredible feeling, but I don't think you're not going to get that by looking at a Rothko on a screen.
No,
are you? Probably not.
No. And I think that again, this is where I really want to take the platform, is to take all of those best bits of the human experience of going to see art or working with an art consultant or a gallerist, both as an artist and as a buyer. But technology has opened up so many other industries and made so many other things streamlined and more accessible. And art has still not quite figured it out. And I think it's ultimately because art is such a sort of nebulous and strange commodity. It's a weird thing. It's not, it's not an easy industry in that sense. But I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that these things will work. It'll just take a lot of figuring out and, time.
My next question is, I mean, you might not know this, but what's the sort of percentage of art that is bought now online or via a gallery space? Do you know any of those sort of? Is it still bought mostly in galleries, or do people?
One of the interesting things is that the reports on this are all very much in the expensive art space. So, I mean, one of my gripes is that affordable art is often talked about as art that's under £5,000 or £10,000, which is, in the context of the millions of pounds that people would spend on a Rothko, is affordable. But for 95% of people, £200 might be a push, but they could probably call it affordable. So I think there's a whole market that is left out of this conversation, which is where we'd like to fit in as well. But I think it's pushing towards half of art through a lot of the big galleries, I think now. I'm not 100% sure, but it's sort of heading that way. And it's been, the online stuff has been growing. And then it was a bit of a spike because of the whole NFT bubble, and all these big galleries were claiming that was online sales because it was digital art, and it was this whole weird thing that that was inevitably going to pan out how it did, that most of them lost value. But this is again the thing. I think there's still such a long way to go for the online market, and I think there's still so much, particularly for those sort of artists who we tend to work with, smaller independent artists who have a bit of a following, but they might just through social media have built a community of people that have shared interests and that kind of thing. And so that online bit is, again, on the cusp of being useful and helpful. Like, they might have built a community, but then actually converting that into sales and running a business on the back of that, that's sort of the next step that I think still needs to be figured out.
And really. Cosimo does that. It acts like the marketplace for the artist.
Yeah, exactly.
And I suppose it must be difficult to quantify, because probably most of these art studies are done, like you say, with the inverted commas, the expensive art, the Hearst, the Emmons, the Rothkos, as we've said, all those things. So do you come across any sort of like skepticism of people buying online, or because perhaps there's not some of those bigger name artists on your platform? Do you see that as
I think there is another issue as well with the art market, and this is more broadly, and this is even more so at the higher end, but I think it's one of the barriers for people at the more affordable end of the market as well, is that people, because of how the art market is, again, presented, going back to that starving artist thing, it's a lot about how people perceive it. But there's this perception that part of the buying art process is as an investment that's going to make you money over time. And 99% of artists, probably more, their work's never going to go up. Like, not enough that you'd be better off just sticking your money in a savings account. Like, at least it's holding some value there. The artwork, no one might buy the artwork. You never know. But that's not the reason to buy most art. The reason to buy most art is because you like it, you like the artist, and you would like to have it in your life and live with it. And again, that's going back to that value piece. It's like, well, the value of having that artwork over 10 years, you would hope that would bring you plenty of value that's not monetary, but you get a lot out of it. And if it does go up, then that's a nice benefit, but that's not the reason to invest. But I think that perception is probably a bigger barrier, I think, for a lot of people buying art than people are happy to buy art online. I think there's a little bit of work that needs to be done on things like the shipping and logistics side, and we're trying to do some stuff there. But I think like the biggest barrier is people have all these questions of, is this going to go up in value? Is it any good? Is it worth what it's worth, what they're saying it's worth now? And I think that's part of our job, is to try and help remove as many of those questions as possible.
But like you said, there's a big difference between buying art coldly as just an investment, or buying art because you love it.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
And, Charles Sarches of the world can afford to buy art even if he thinks it's shit, because he knows it's going to be an investment.
Yeah.
Whack it in some Swiss vault somewhere, bring it out 2 years later, reappraise it and go, I've had an extra 3 million quid to this. That's a different world, isn't it? But I think we do have to get to the point that art really is about the feeling it gives you. Every time you look on the wall and you see it, or whatever that piece of art is, it's about that, isn't it? And there's a whole world of artists waiting to be explored and discovered, shall we say, that aren't ever going to be, like you say, an investment.
There was a New York Times article the other week that was talking about there's a whole bunch of artists in the last couple of years who had been just completely inflated by the market, because it was basically these gallerists and buyers who were it was all in their interests for the artist price to just keep going up and up and up and up. And there was one artist who, had been selling for 200 grand a pop, and now couldn't, it's still very impressive, but he then couldn't sell for 20 grand a year later, because the market had just people had just decided, oh, he's peaked. And once they peak, then they're not worth investing in, because it's, and it's like, and so, and the reality is it's so, and this is where the art market gets shady, is that there's, and this is again where I hope that our vision for how the art market can work changes this a bit. But it's like, too many people other than the artist have a vested interest in skewing the market and making things more expensive and closed off and all these sort of things. And that doesn't benefit the artist or the buyer, who should be the most important people in that transaction. So
it just adds to the sort of that elitist attitude that the art world, in inverted commas, has got, hasn't it, really?
No, definitely.
So what resources do you offer artists? Is it advice? Is it how do you price your work? What sort of things are in the resources that you guys offer your artists?
So I mean, the platform primarily, like I say, set up as a marketplace, so you can list your work and then you set up payments and people can buy it, and that's all managed and securely done through the platform. But beyond that, we've been developing something we're calling Cosimo Academy, in which we have a directory which is free, which is a list of all the kind of art suppliers, framers, exhibition opportunities, all these kind of things that artists can just go through and look. If you're in Birmingham, you need a framer, go find someone there. So we've got the directory. We've got a pricing calculator, which is good fun and seems
elaborate.
Seems to work.
Why do you say good fun?
Because because artists, or it's one of the big questions we get is like, how do I price my work?
Yeah,
and it's been really interesting since we launched the calculator to see where people are. And some people, they are dead on what the calculator suggests, and that's always really nice. And the thing we say about the calculator is it's a starting point. Like, it's a way to give you some frame of reference.
And what parameters, variables does the calculator take into account?
So it's, things like whether you're self-taught or you've done a master's, or whether you've exhibited in a solo show, or whether you've been part of a group exhibition, or if you've been represented the country at the Biennale, then obviously you're going to be right up there. And then it takes into consideration things like just the size of the artwork, how long it took you to make it, whether it's a print or a limited edition, or whether it's an original. So it takes into account all these kind of things. And then we built an algorithm based off a little bit of the kind of data from the platform, but also some of the stuff we think about how pricing should work for artists. And then it gives you a range, 2 prices that, you should at least be charging this, and then maybe the max is probably this. But then we do say, we're not going to say you shouldn't try and charge more, because you probably should, you always charge more. I always say to artists, stick another 0 on the end and you'd probably be able to sell it to someone. There will be a buyer out there, but this is a nice place to start. And so, so it's fun because it's been interesting seeing where people are. And there's been a couple of times people are miles off, but that's typically on they're underpricing their work significantly. And then it's nice because then you can start to have a conversation about, well, how do we get you up to where you probably should be, in order to, particularly if you're someone that wants to move towards being full-time as an artist, that's typically where those people sit.
It's very true, isn't it? There's a market for everything. You've just got to find it. And a lot of the times, it's interesting to me that most artists will be underselling themselves. Mm-hmm. That seems, again, fits in with the bracket of, oh, God, do I value my work as much as I think, and I think it's important to have those. So as well as the calculator, what sort of other resources have you got on Cosimo that can, because it seems like we're sort of gearing down the same road. We want people to succeed. So what else are you putting in place on the website that can help artists? Is it those universal pain points, the imposter syndrome, financial insecurity, creative block, all those things?
100%. So we've got
talk a bit more on that?
So we've got the pricing tool and the directory fit under the Academy, but then we've also got a video library, which is a bunch of video content we've created, basically video lessons that run through everything from SEO marketing for artists to starting to create a business plan for your work, starting to create a vision for your practice. And so literally from that initial okay, I am an artist, but where do I fit in this art world? What am I about? What's my practice about? How do I talk about that? How do I leverage that kind of understanding that you would then develop to start to create a path to get to wherever you want to get to with it? So there's a whole bunch of video lessons that we've created around that. that's been really good fun to put together. And again, similarly, been really nice to see how much value that's been driving for artists.
That's exactly what I was about to say. It's all about how you can add value to an artist's journey. And like we mentioned earlier, the artist wants to create most of the time, but we don't know how to do I've got to do a marketing plan or a business plan, or I've got to sit down and write, like you say, write about my work.
Yeah.
Almost impossible. So giving people those facilities, I think, is so important. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason I wanted to get you on, because I think a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this are going to be creatives looking to try and exactly get themselves to where they want to be. And Cosimo is one of those things that can help facilitate that. How does, apart from the fact that, which is a massive part, apart from the no commission thing, how does Cosimo, do you think, differentiate between some of those other online platforms?
I think, one of the things that we are working towards in that sense, I think, is always this kind of sense of really wanting to be on the side of the artists and to have a relationship with our artists where it feels like we are supporting them, whether that's through, the technology making their lives easier, or whether it's through the community, or whether it's through the academy and education and all that kind of stuff. A position where they're getting value and support from us, but they don't feel like we're leeching off them, which I think it's not always the case, because again, there are great galleries and there are good platforms as well out there that work for certain artists that they do get that value from them. But the problem, one of my big kind of theories, I suppose, is that that's very hard to do at scale. So it's very hard for most artists to access that kind of support or opportunity. So the platform can kind of democratize access to those things, but in a way that the artists don't feel like they're being taken advantage of. And I think that then creates an ecosystem where everybody wants to be part of it and wants to engage with it. Because I think that's one of the things I always felt about some of the other platforms, was that the artists weren't incentivized to use those platforms to sell their work, because they were giving away so much in commission, or it was easier to sell offline or whatever. So we want to make it so that it's just really easy for people to engage, and they enjoy doing that, and they feel better for that on both buying and selling sides. So I think it's almost like an ethos kind of position as much as anything kind of practical.
Which I think is important, like you say, because, and also I suppose with the big platforms like the Saatchis, and how many artists are on, you could spend a day just
and the thing is, and this is the thing as well, like they are in a position, a lot of these bigger platforms, where they're big companies now, and this is something I've learned going through the process of building a startup. They don't really necessarily need to innovate, and they don't need to do the work on the matchmaking or whatever, because there are enough people that use it, and there's enough expensive work selling on there that they make their money. They don't need to take a risk to try and change the system.
It's like a self-fulfilling entity.
So it's like they're doing fine. And that's where, I think we can come in and take advantage of some of these developments in the last few years technologically, whether that's like AI or whatever. I like jumping on those things, because I think, as with the blockchain thing, the NFTs, there's a lot of value I still see in that space, but it was clear to me from the get-go that was going to be a weird bubble, and it was going to crash, and a lot of people were going to get screwed over.
Well, when you had your next door neighbour learning how to build an NFT on Photoshop or Canva or something like that, it was a bit like,
exactly.
Not sure about this.
And the way I always talked about that was the value of the NFT was not in the blockchain. The value was in the art, and it's that. So it was like saying that a painting was inherently valuable because it was made with oils. Like, not necessarily. Like that's potentially part of it, but the value is really in the content and the meaning and who did it and why and all that sort of stuff. So
is it only? Oh, so Cosimo is only physical work.
Yeah. But and I think that's the. But the reason I say that is because I think when I talk about how I think we can use AI and how we can ultimately end up using blockchain and all these kind of things, I say that with with a kind of openness that we're not just saying this because it's the latest bandwagon.
Yeah.
It's because I can see the value these things will create in the whole.
Yeah, like anything, it will provide benefit, but to what level?
Because, and I think because what you could do is you could go, oh, we're an AI-powered art platform now, and then and you could talk about that for a while and people get excited, and then AI kind of becomes normal or moves on, and then you're the AI platform and you're not exciting and new anymore. And I think you don't want to position yourself just on that.
My pushback on that would be, I don't necessarily feel like, as an art buyer, I want to go on an AI. I don't mind AI being involved in it, but promoting it as an AI, it feels like there's no human involvement, which almost takes away that art element.
And that's where I think there's why we're being a little bit slower in talking about some of those things, because I think that those hesitations are things that I would feel as a buyer, exactly like you say. And I think I know a few other platforms that are maybe jumping in a bit too quick on that, and I think you've got to kind of straddle that. I think, particularly if you really believe in the technology, you want to bring people along with you and show them the way a bit, and that can take quite a long time to do. So I think it's something to be wary of.
Yeah, but like you say, something that any tools like that can make life easier for yourself or artists or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. My last question about sort of art buying, and do you, presumably with all this stuff that you've got going on, do you see trends within the sales on Cosimo? Is it like, oh, there's more, a 48% painting trend or 12% photography trend? Do you get to notice, or do you study those variables to sort of go which is selling more and what's not?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing, and this maybe goes a little bit to your point around the hesitation about buying art online still. Most of the art that's bought through Cosimo at the moment is prints, whether that's limited edition or some open edition, which puts it, very affordable. It's kind of, where we want to be in a lot of ways. It's also, I think, from a buying perspective, it's easier to commit to buying a print than it is to buying a painting, for example. And again, this is partly because if you're buying a painting, you've got to go, well, A, where's it going to go? Do I have enough space? B, it's probably going to be more expensive, so do I have enough money? C, am I going to need to get it framed? And if so, that's going to cost a fortune because framing is very expensive. And then D, how am I actually going to hang it on the wall? Am I going to have to hire Bob the builder to come and come and stick it up for me? So there's a lot of concerns there. I think that people, like I say, I think there's stuff we can do to help with that over time. But yeah, prints are very much the most common thing that sells on a platform. But again, I think that's something, as we grow, that's something I'm keen to explore as well, is how we can, if we're getting information about that, about what's hot and what's not, and then you can actually start to help people. So say people do want to buy for an investment purpose, then you can maybe start to help them understand which art is, looking investable, or which artists are most exciting to the market or whatever. And I think that can then, go back into that, feeding into that experience of that sort of expert insight that a gallerist or a curator might be able to give you. We might be able to give people as well. So I think that's something that we want to use going forward as well.
Okay, so what advice would you give to artists looking to sell their work? You've said obviously prints is an option, so would you say try and always offer a print version as well as original?
Yeah, I think I think one thing is to have as many price points as possible, because, and this is something I see with a lot of the most successful artists I know, particularly young kind of independent artists, is they have work at different price points so that different types of buyers can engage with their work. So you want to have the really expensive collectible stuff as much as you can. Like, you want to have a good body of work there that is, in the thousands a piece.
Is that purely from like a psychology of selling point of view? It's like, if you've got those high-end pieces, oh wow, I can't afford that. I don't want a 1999 Etsy print, but somewhere in the middle is my bracket.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's definitely a part of that. And as well, I think it helps you if you can start to be brave enough to put your work into those price brackets, because that's, almost whoever you are and whatever your art, that's really what it should be priced at to make it worth your while to do it.
And it's interesting that you say that artists need to be braver to put that extra zero on there, because that's what I'm sort of finding. It's like it's the artist that undersells himself more than anybody else. And you've just said that with the calculator. Often artists are underpricing themselves.
But the challenge then is that the reality of that, if you put the prices of the originals up, is that you're shrinking the audience who can potentially buy it. Although ironically, there is a bit anecdotal, but I've seen this before where like by making your work more expensive, you're actually making it more buyable, because the people who have if you're in this kind of middle ground of like maybe in the £400 piece mark, there's not that many people that are buying art at that price, because they're either going, if they've got that kind of money, they might push to 1,000, 2,000, or they can't really afford that, so they'll just get a print for up to 100, 200 quid. So there's an interesting thing about if you push that price up a bit.
Does that make, again, psychology of selling, does that make you, oh, well, look at that. If that's that price, they must be a little bit more exclusive. Or is there an element of, especially with art, I've seen it when I've been to art fairs, you've got stuff that resembles very closely lots of very famous artists' work at these affordable art fairs. And they might be a tenth of the price, but that tenth might still be £10,000. And someone goes, oh, it looks like that, and it's, it looks like that, it smells like that, but it's not like that. And, there is an element of ego, isn't there? Oh, that's a piece that I got, it was £10,000.
And that just starts to become a conversation.
It's about what the piece of art cost you rather than
which again is a bit of a problem for the space. But and I talk about this a lot in business, I think, but so from the artist business side of things, it's like, you can open yourself up to those kind of things and go like, if this is how the world is actually operating, I'll have to engage with it in that way. And there's no point trying to pretend otherwise, because that's not going to help anyone. And
would that be one of your big points of advice then? Sort of.
Exactly. Be realistic of like, and this is one of the exercises we take people through on the video content, is like, actually sit down and figure out how much you need to make. Dean, who we worked with on all this educational stuff, he talks about, buying days back of work. So like, how much would you have to, if you work 5 days a week, how much would you have to earn a year to be able to take that down to 4 days a week? So you've bought a day back to do your art, and then you can slowly buy back your whole time. Great. But so sit down and look at that and go, well, and just, how much art can I produce? How much can I sell it for? And, break it down into those things and be quite kind of open about that. And then from there, you can start to build out a plan and flesh that out.
Do you think, I think of myself, and I've had to learn organization, systems, all sorts of things like that, because that wasn't my mindset. Do you find a lot of artists are a bit like, I love the creating bit, but, I don't want to do a spreadsheet about how many pieces of work I need to sell to make my yearly.
A little bit, but then...
What's the resistance from artists like about that? Or presumably they've got to your platform and they've found it, they're looking to go to that next level, so probably less resistance.
A little bit, but I think there's almost, again, it goes back to the thing, it's almost like artists aren't as keen to do that kind of stuff because they feel like they shouldn't like doing that kind of thing. But the most successful artists I know, that is how I think that you just have to be honest. Again, you have to be honest with yourself about like, I can't just make art, hope that people turn up and buy it. I have to run this properly as an organized business. And I have to do that if I want to make my art how I want to make it. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But don't think that you will then be able to just make a living from your art. And that if you want it to be your job, parts of it has to be job. It has to be work. It's not always just, sunshine and rainbows. It's like,
yeah, definitely not. And I think that is, as I've already said, it's a big problem sometimes to systemize your ways of working, and you feel like I should just be free to create. And I'm like, that's great. But like you say, social media is a thing now. Marketing, pricing, getting your work out there, building the community that you need, it's difficult. So have you got any, I presume Cosimo's got some stars on its platform, but have you got any sort of like success stories that you can think of that you can, because obviously I want the viewers to go, well, what we need to show them the social proof, John, of why they need to come on. So any success stories that you can think of artists that are sort of 0 to...
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of artists that we've worked with who've done some really great things. One of our early artists was someone based in Birmingham called Imogen Morris, who you might have come across, does these amazing thread and needle pieces. And she started putting some work on the platform. We then actually helped to get a commission piece in an event space. Then, and she's gone on to do some really cool kind of corporate collaborations, not necessarily through us, but I think we actually supported Imogen to figure some of those things out and to do some of that. So, but she's brilliant, and she's one of those artists as well that's really, she's worked on her art, and she's worked on the business side of her art and been open about that. And so so Imogen's brilliant. Caitlin Flood-Molyneux, Welsh artist who is on the platform, and Caitlin's been she's been doing exhibitions all over the place. She's got a whole tour going through Wales and stuff at the moment. So big fan of Caitlin's, and it's been great to see her work grow over the last about 18 months. So
that's amazing. And I think it's important for people to see those success stories, because often you can think, well, I could put my work on the platform and then just nothing happens and you get lost in the ether. But seeing Imogen and Caitlin, who will include some links to their work, seeing those success, I think it's like anything. You have to see someone do it to go, well, they did it.
Yeah.
So,
and then we've got General Blimey, who's a kind of graphic artist from Birmingham, does lots of scenes of local Birmingham, kind of, if you know, kind of places. He's been our most successful seller. He sold the most stuff on the platform.
Really?
And he's
what's his name again? Sorry?
General Blimey.
General Blimey, yeah. Again,
but he's done a really good job of building a community and just being consistent and just putting stuff out there. And
apart from obviously joining Cosimo, have you got any advice for artists and of how to build community and perhaps get themselves a bit more out there? Perhaps there's some people listening to this that feel like perhaps they're not ready to join Cosimo just yet, but they want to start making those tentative steps.
I mean, I think
top tips.
Yeah, I mean, other than joining Cosimo, I mean, the academy stuff is brilliant if you're in that spot, because I think it can help you if you're just starting to figure out some of those things. That the content there can actually help you. And I think this is really important. I was actually talking to someone about this the other day. It's how important it is to try and start this stuff as early as possible and then go, rather, because it's a lot harder to go back.
In the sense that then it will just become a habit.
Yeah, and you get stuck in your ways with things, or you, like I said, there's people who are pricing their work at a really, much lower than they need to be, and then it's a real uphill battle to move up that chain to where you need and should be, but also your audience aren't there, so you'd have to find a whole new buying audience, and that it's a very difficult thing to do. But I think the main thing really is, and I suppose this is a thing that I've tried to do a lot as well, is to build a network, particularly as artists. It's so easy to create in isolation and get stuck in in reclusive kind of way, and it's partly because I think a lot of artists are quite introverted. But again, online gives you the opportunity to create networks and to do that in a less taxing way than necessarily going to networking meetings, although that is, going to business networking meetings as an artist is one of the best things you can do, because the people there are sick of talking to insurance brokers. And if you come and say, I'm a painter, they're like, oh, that's really interesting. And then they'll probably go, oh, Dave, have you seen this painter? Come meet this painter. And then you meet a whole load of people. And those people probably have either their money or the business's money, and then you can start to create collaborations and commissions and all that sort of thing.
Interesting.
I think that's
I wouldn't have even put the two together, but I suppose, you become the novelty in the room, because everyone else is, like you say, an accountant.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's interesting.
So I think I would advise artists to try and get to one of those, every month or so. It doesn't have to be, and not even the same one, preferably not the same one, probably, because you don't, I hate those networking things where you go to the same event, it's the same people. It's not really networking at that point. But if you can dip in and out of a few of them, so that'd be a big bit of advice. And then the other bit is just, this is one of Dean's things, I think, but just get in the studio and make your art, Because then to some degree you've got to share it then if you start making it, and then you get to the point where you've got no more room in the studio, so you need to get rid of some of it, so you need to sell it. So I think that's as good a kind of driver as anything. Definitely. And that's what you want to do as an artist. Go and make it.
Make your art and get it out there.
Yeah.
When you say it like that, it doesn't sound so complicated, John. Okay, so talk to me about, we've done what Cosimo is and everything, and you've mentioned Dean, but how did Cosimo come about? Who is it? You're the founder, but who else is involved, and what roles do they play?
Yeah, so Cosimo started, it was originally called Easel, but then Manchester Art Fair launched their own platform called Easel, so I had to change that because I didn't want to fight. But actually, I'd always wanted to call it Cosimo.
I know who Cosimo is, but can you tell the audience who Cosimo was? So
Cosimo de' Medici is considered the founding father of the Renaissance. The Medici family were a banking family in Florence, and they had a lot of money.
And essentially they were patrons of the arts, and right? So they weren't artists, but they commissioned artists and palaces.
Yeah, exactly. So they commissioned a lot of art and basically employed a lot of artists, and were part of they were one of the kind of drivers behind the Renaissance, but the building of Florence into what we go to Florence to go and see all the art and all that kind of, and all the beautiful buildings. And that was partly driven by them.
So why did you choose, obviously he's a patron of the arts, but why him?
I think because the timing of it is important, because he was like this, he kind of kick-started this slightly philanthropic desire to engage with arts and to see art as to the value that it brings. And, we talk about the Renaissance as being the height of art, and his backing was one of the reasons behind that. And I like the idea of us as a platform trying to do something similar and kickstart a new Renaissance, but also the idea that we can help more people to be Cosimo, so help more people become patrons of artists and to support their work, and that's what the platform does as well. So that's where the kind of Cosimo bit came from, and also I suppose it sounded like a tech company, Cosimo.
I suppose it does a bit, yeah.
That was another part of the reason I just thought, that sounds like it.
But the sounds like Cosimo de' Medici is way more romantic and beautiful, John. Let's stick with that. No, it's not about tech, people. It's not about tech. Okay, so I suppose you said you went into art history, but what was, you obviously...
What was I thinking?
No. My question is, you went into art history because you didn't see being an artist as a viable career, but presumably that suggests that you were an artist, you are an artist. Do you create?
No, I haven't made much for a long time. I did art at school, probably my favourite subject, loved it. But also I've always loved history, so it was pretty much just I can do both or be involved in both, just to study, because I had two angles. I thought I'd either go into marketing or I'd end up working in the art world, whether that was museums or commercial galleries, just the art world.
And you've sort of now combined them both.
Well, yeah, I suppose, yeah. And so to that end, in my first year at uni, I decided to go and try and get a job in a local commercial art gallery back a bit near my parents, and during the summer holidays. And it was a cool job because the gallery was owned by a family who also owned a DIY store. They had a few businesses, but one of the other things they ran was a DIY store. So I was doing 2 or 3 days a week in the gallery and 2 or 3 days a week in the DIY store.
Which bit of a mix there, John.
Which was good fun. I enjoyed it. It was a good summer. But I saw in that experience of working in a gallery, the impact the commission fees had on the economics of the whole market, and how artists would, I was seeing stuff in there that was a couple £100, but the gallery was taking half of that. And so how can the artist is just, they're not even getting paid minimum wage for the time they put into that.
Printed and framed or whatever.
And the thing as well, like I used to be a bit harsh on this, but I think now I kind of, the reason the galleries charge that is because they have to. Their overheads are so massive that they have to charge that much for it to make it worth their while. But again, that's where technology, your overheads are not as high because everything's more scalable.
Sorry, another tangent that I've just thought of and come to mind. Presumably, did we see more physical galleries closed during COVID, which meant an increase in push?
Yeah, I don't know,
mean
actually,
closed full time, not just closed for the lockdown, because obviously, you know, an art gallery, like you say, the overheads are massive. You go through that.
Well, yeah,
how
I mean,
do you
the whole.
sustain?
I don't know, but I would imagine so. If you just look at the kind of, just look in Birmingham, there's a couple of galleries that are more local. Owen at Lux is a really good guy, and
guys at Seventh Circle.
Yeah, and they're brilliant, and they're trying to do some really good stuff and support local emerging artists. And I think those guys are all brilliant. But it's mental to me that they're the only ones, really. You've got Collierson, which is a bit more high end, and then you're into the kind of white walls and all those sort of stuff. That's a different kind of art world,
and it's a strange
but a city like Birmingham, the guys at Seventh Circle, they're out in Moseley, which is not in the city centre. There's only one gallery in the city, so it's mental.
Yeah.
So I think that there's definitely, I think that's definitely been on the decline for a bit as well. Which again, and this is a kind of another point, is that the reality for those galleries is they only have so much wall space, so they can only take so many artists on.
Yeah, you've got limited advertising space, shall we say. If you've only got one gallery and you can only get 6 artists in there, and there's 50, and it's a no-brainer.
And that, and then you extrapolate that over the whole. I reckon there's hundreds of thousands of artists in the UK.
Yeah,
and there's the vast majority of them are constantly battling to try and get on wall space and all this kind of stuff, and that is. It's tough. So that was one of the opportunities I saw with the online thing. And then the other side of it was I was going, well, I would like to buy some art. I'm studying art history. I just got this job working in the gallery. I was like, I've got a couple £100. I'll try and buy a piece of art to start that. I was like, I'd love to have an art collection one day. So maybe I can start trying to build a little bit of a mini collection. And I was looking around online. I was like, none of these platforms are any good. I don't know where to start. They're saying it's affordable, but it's still in the thousands of pounds. And I was looking for maybe like a print or something. And I just felt like that feeling that people have going into galleries in person, where it's like intimidating and daunting, and you don't know whether you should talk or not. I felt that was the same online, and so that was part of the reason as well for the platform, was to create something that had a different feel to it. That was a bit more engaging and friendly, and not kind of that kind of snooty thing that you get with galleries.
But was there a moment though? I know you said you worked in the gallery and you observed these things, but was there a specific moment where you went, okay, now's the time, let's start Cosimo?
Yeah, well, so I don't remember one specific point, but I think one thing was I was probably watching telly, right? And I probably saw an advert for eToro, the stocks and trading company.
Okay.
And there was eToro and Purple Bricks and a couple of other things in other industries that were charging no commission. And I was like, well, if they're not charging commission, why do art galleries need to charge 50% commission? Like, there's obviously, you just create a different business model, but that makes it more workable for people.
Yeah.
So that was probably the kind of where the idea came from, to some degree. And then I remember I spoke to a couple of mates, and started scoping stuff out. One of them was he was doing computer science at university. So I was like, oh, he can code it all for me. But we never got too far with that, probably because I didn't want to give him half the company, but he's still a very good mate of mine. And so, and eventually I basically had a little bit of savings from this job and my student loan. And so I was like, well, I can scrape together enough to pay someone to build an early version of this platform.
So you took a risk.
Yeah.
I feel like we've gone full circle back to what we were talking about. So artists take risks just being artists. Entrepreneurs take risks in their businesses. So you've taken a gamble with your savings. And
that was, I probably haven't thought about it too much in that sense. But yeah, it was a pretty big risk. I mean, I've taken a lot of risks along the way.
Okay, say more on that. So what does it even take? I mean, you've invested some savings into your startup idea, but how do you go from?
I mean, so that was when I was doing my master's. Got a website together. I mean, this is something I've never quite figured out as well. The website cost me, I reckon, at least a quarter of what it should have cost me, and I think that might just be because the company that did the website, just thought it was a cool idea. They realised I didn't have any money, so they were just like, "We'll build this for you."
Great.
And
don't look a gift horse in the mouth. That's a quarter of the price. That's amazing.
I reckon so. And they did a really good job.
So if they hadn't have inadvertently cut
well, yeah, funny.
cut the price, do you think would Cosimo be
I don't know,
a thing?
Because I emailed 3 developers and they were the only ones that got back to me. And I just went with them and that was it. Yeah, it's funny when you think about it like that. But
so you invest your savings, you found the web developers to start it up. They seem to have charged you a quarter of what it was. Brilliant, that's a bonus. But again, like, what's your vision for the company at that point? What's your plan? I mean,
there wasn't a plan.
So you were being an artist, essentially. You were just winging it.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay.
I think I had a spreadsheet that had some sort of
Oh, no,
business
if you've got a
model.
spreadsheet, we've just established that if you've got a spreadsheet, everything's fine. You're a complete working business, John.
It was
fine.
It was a fanciful business plan. But according to that, I'd probably be a billionaire by now, but you know.
Well, but no, I think that's interesting because obviously you've presumably had to sacrifice things. You've invested in this yourself. You're building a company. You're a startup. Do you find investors? Do you find employees? Who's in the company?
So I put the savings in to build the platform. Then I got a grant from the University of Birmingham to get some legal work done to do the T's and C's and all that sort of stuff to get us launched. Then we launched it, and I'd only spoken to a few friends of mine who were artists and a couple of local artists that I'd known on the art trail. And so I got a couple of them to sign up. And again, this is where I would do things very differently now, but I did the whole build it and they'll come thing rather than not build an audience and then build a solution for the audience. But did that. People started using it. We had some sales coming through, and I was still doing my masters, so I was still living on student loans.
And your masters was in art history?
Yeah. And then graduated from my masters, and I knew this is what I wanted to do, so I didn't try and get a proper job necessarily.
Quote, unquote, the inverted commas proper job. It's so funny.
But I did have an internship lined up so I graduated in September and then had an internship at the Barber Institute in Birmingham, which was cool, lined up for the first quarter of the next year. So I had a little window where I needed to make a living. So I actually worked on the Birmingham Christmas market selling flavoured coffee beans for that period, which was probably the best paying job I've ever had. Partly because I was working like 6 days a week, all day.
But also I think that's commendable as well, because you've got this dream of a platform you want to start, and a lot of people would be too snobby. But as artists, creatives, or anyone, goal setting, it's all right to do the waitressing job, the part-time job, the labouring job. I've done a million jobs that I would never tell anyone about to get me to, just 100%. Facilitate a life or
and I suppose you think about it in that kind of that you're buying the time, like, and that was kind of what I was doing there, and then had this internship, so that lasted a few months, and then after that internship, I was I managed to freelance doing a few different bits. So I was helping a mate of mine do some marketing. I helped someone launch a barber shop. I did all sorts of random bits.
By any means necessary, right? Just to keep your dream alive.
And in that period, I made enough to give myself 6 months runway, like to go all out. So I decided to do that. I was like, I've got 6 months to make Cosimo work.
And what does that 6 months look like?
That 6 months turned into 7 or 8 months, I think. And because I just had to eke it out as long as possible. And then I was fortunate enough to get from the University of Birmingham, they just launched a startup support program. And part of that was they had a scholarship program where they would basically pay you to work on your business for a year. So I was fortunate enough to receive that. And that then gave me another year in which I began to properly develop a business, a proper business, I think, in that time, and an understanding of the business and where we were taking it, and also just how the business world works. And that's when we set out to raise investment. So we then did a crowdfund where we had 165 investors from all over the world. And then, from that point, that was where it went from a bit of a kind of a hobby business into something more serious. And at that point, we grew from a couple of hundred artists to where we are now with, over 1,000 artists.
And who else is within the business with you, John?
So Dean is very heavily involved. We do some work with...
Sorry, what's Dean's role?
So Dean is, his role hasn't necessarily got an official title.
Undefined.
But head of artist development is one of the things we frame it as. But he's an artist coach and mentor. And so we're trying to embed what his expertise... He's brilliant at helping artists get to that next level, and that's where most artists on the Cosmo platform are trying to get to that next level. So it's like, how can we spread that and use the platform to help them access that? And also, he's been a pretty successful artist in his own right, so he's great to have on board from that perspective. We've got a tech team who are split between the UK and India, and there's got about 8 people across that, and have a brilliant relationship with them, and they're great to work with. And then we've got Zoe Getzman, is based down in London, and she's done a few different things for us, but she's currently working as a bit of a kind of consultant and curator. So we're working with other people to put on events for our artists and find opportunities for our artists to sell their work as well. So, yeah.
And I know we sort of flipped on it earlier. So if you don't take commission, how do you afford to run a team? How does that work?
So,
is there advertising within the platform? Or?
So we've got obviously the subscription side of things. So artists can pay the subscription to unlock more features. We've launched a scholarship program as well, where we've actually got a company called InCard, which is a digital bank, who are sponsoring artists to get access to the full platform and some additional support from me and Dean as well. So that's been really cool. And we've recently just got some funding from Innovate UK to further develop some of the educational resources we're doing. So it's a mix of the investment we've raised, funding we get from other bodies, the revenue from the business, and that's roughly how it's made up, really.
And what would be your sort of dream for Cosimo? How long has Cosimo been going now?
7 years.
7 years.
So,
and what would say next 5 years? What would you see? What would be some big goals for Cosimo? What would be some big achievements that you'd like to see on the platform or within the business?
It's funny because I was talking to someone about this yesterday. I think we're still figuring out a lot. It's not, the answer to this question is not necessarily something I can put my finger on. But one thing I know is that the really interesting thing is that my vision hasn't really changed at all in the 7 years since we started. And again, I can't necessarily pinpoint what that vision is, but there's a sense of what I think I want the platform to look like, work like, how I want the art world to be. And I know we're not there yet, and I know no one else is there yet. And that's the thing, is like, I feel like that's what I'm driving towards, is that bit where we've solved some of the problems that we set out to, whatever that is. And I think the part of that is just being in a position where more artists are able to sell their work and make more money from their work. And it's almost as simple as that. But I think it's, ultimately where we want to be is helping thousands of artists, ideally across the world, selling their work online and helping them to professionalize their practice, I think, as well. So,
and I guess my next question to that is, that's a big mission.
Yeah.
Why? What? I don't want to say, what's your why? It's such a cheesy question, but why? Because
I think part of it is because I am a stubborn bastard who, like I say, saw there's a problem in this space. There's loads of artists who want to sell their work and they can't sell the work. And there's probably loads of people who want to buy their work that can't buy it. And there's all these issues in the art market. And I've seen this problem. And I need, I can't leave it until I've fixed it. Because I know that someone will fix it someday. I want to try and figure it out. Because the thing is, it's a really complicated industry. And I love the challenge of that, like trying to figure out how we make this work. I think that's really intellectually exciting and fun to do.
creativity at its base is problem solving.
Exactly,
so you're trying to solve a massive problem for artists with your own creativity and expertise, I guess.
I suppose. So that's, like I said, I would not mind that much. I would mind a little bit, but not that much, if someone else figured it out and made it work. Because at least I'd know that it was that it could be solved. You know what I mean?
That. It doesn't have to be you necessarily, but you want the problem solved.
I want the problem solved because that's why, and that's why I'm really I'm really open to collaborating with people and potential kind of competitors and this kind of thing, because it's like, it is a really big problem. And I think the only way we will solve it is if we kind of work together to try and do that.
And can you narrow that problem down into one sentence? I know it's so broad, but what is the problem I know it's like you're connecting with artists, with art buyers, but what is the crux of that problem that you're trying to solve?
I think buying art online needs to be as easy as buying a toothbrush on Amazon. And that's where there's a big gap. And there's a lot of components to that. There's a whole...
Well, just the sheer feeling of an art over a toothbrush. I'd imagine people get much more love and joy from a piece of art. Well, I hope they do. Clean teeth are a good thing, but okay, I get that. It's a commendable problem to try and be solving.
I suppose so. But I think there's probably, there's another part of it as well, is I've said it earlier. I chose not to be an artist because I didn't think I could make money doing it. And I'm not fussed about that with me because I'm very happy doing what I'm doing, but it really bugs me when I see really talented artists not able to pursue their art because they've had to give it up because they've gone to get a full-time job, and then they're like, oh, well,
so
I can't
you
make
are
my art.
the Cosimo de Medici, patron of the arts, essentially.
That's
you want to be the facilitator in whatever sense to help artists create and lead their
I suppose so.
most brilliant creative lives.
That'd be good.
That's pretty epic, Jude. That's quite the mission, the life mission.
Yeah.
But I suppose that sort of brings us nicely on to, I asked the guests that come on the podcast if they've got an inspiring quote or something that's resonated with you over maybe the 8 years of doing Cosimo that you think could be a good thing to leave our listeners on.
Yeah.
And also a potential next guest, someone that you think would be an inspiring guest for a podcast. So choose at will which one. I don't mind which order you do them in. Choose a guest or do your quote, whichever.
So guest, I'd say Dean Melbourne. He's brilliant in terms of thinking about all the stuff you're interested in, about helping creatives to get out of their own way, I think is one way of putting it. And he's a brilliant guy and he's a great communicator. I think that's one of the things I love.
Which is always helpful for me.
Which is helpful for podcasts. But yeah, Dean would be great, I think. And the quote, I was thinking about this because I am awful, even with the bit lead-in time. You told me ahead of time that I'd have this question. I'm awful at plucking things out of the ether and being like, oh yeah, that's my favourite quote. I can't say, you ask me my favourite film, like it changes every time because I get that completely. And I was thinking about a whole different range of things. But the one that I kind of came to is a little bit unorthodox, but there's a story behind it, I think. So the quote is the famous, to be or not to be. That is the question, whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. Now, I can say that now, but when I was...
Very well, I'm just going to say that, very well remembered, John. He's not reading this from a phone, and that was straight off the cuff. I was like, wow.
When I was 15, I had to recite that in English for my GCSE English, and it was recorded. And I froze on stage in front of my whole class, forgot the words. I have this vision in my mind of the bit where it says slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, everybody out in the classroom doing bow and arrows signs with their hands. And it was the most horrendous.
What was the feeling that you were feeling in that moment, do you think?
I don't know. I think I'd never loved public speaking as a kid. And so I don't know. I think I'd worked myself up, and being me, particularly at that time, hadn't done the homework enough, hadn't learnt the lines properly. And so got up on stage and just froze. And also I think it was because there was a camera. I I didn't like. I'd never really been recorded before, so there was this weird feeling of having a camera watching me, and knowing I think that was going to be there was a record,
the document of it. Yeah.
But the worst bit was then that meant there was a document of me freezing.
Oh no!
Which I think we ended up watching it back as a class a few weeks later. But I got off stage, sat down in my seat, burst into tears. It was the most embarrassing thing I felt at that time that could ever happen. But
what does that quote mean to you now? What does it sort of?
Well, so this is the thing. So I think since then, I have had to do a lot more public speaking. I avoided it through the rest of school, and I was pretty confident in all other things. I was in the sports teams. I could talk in a class, but if I ever got I would get asked to speak at assembly, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that.
It's that singular focus, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
especially when you're young.
And it was, but then once I left school, I made an active decision when I went to uni. I was like, I'm going to learn how to speak in public. And also partly on my course, it was really good because they would make us present every week. So I just had to get better at it. And since then, I've done a TEDx talk. I've spoken at conferences. I spoke at my grandpa's funeral, like all these kind of things that they could be quite stressful having had that experience, but I feel like I've overcome that to some degree. Still not perfect at it, but relative to what that was.
No, I think that's important. It's like, bravery is it's not being scared, is it? It's doing the thing anyway and getting to a point where you go, actually, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
But if I do it again.
But I suppose the thing I always think about is it's never going to be worse than that. Like that was pretty much the bottom. So
you've got your bar set.
So I'll be fine. Yeah. So that.
Yeah, and how that's an important quote for you, but how can you apply that? I know that's a very personal story.
Yeah.
But that quote, and how would you think that apply in the terms of what we've been talking about in terms of artists, creatives, entrepreneurs, goal setters, even anyone trying to achieve anything?
I think particularly for artists, there's a fear a lot of the time of putting your stuff out there. And art is particularly personal. People talk about you're giving a bit of yourself every time you make an artwork. And so for me, it's kind of a testament to that idea of putting stuff out there, being willing and able to take that risk, and realizing that even if it goes as badly as you think it can, because it doesn't always, but sometimes it does go as badly as you think it can, you still can get on and do it again, and you'll be fine, and you can use that to fuel or improve what you're doing in the future. So that's
build strength, build resilience, build character through adversity.
Have a cry and then
get it out your system, freeze on stage, and then just go, I'm never letting that happen again.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, dude, I think we've covered some brilliant stuff in there, and I think there's so many good takeaways. So just want to say thank you again. Can you just tell us where people can find you, what's the best way they can find Cosimo, how, if they're an artist or creative and they want to sign up, how they can?
Yep. So www.Cosimo.Art, so COSIMO.ART, and it's hopefully very intuitive. There's a big sign in button on the homepage. So if you are interested, please do. Like I say, it's free to get started and have a play around. So please check it out. And also, if you want to buy stuff, you know where to go. Yeah,
because that's another thing we'll say. I'm sure there's not only creatives, there'll be people wanting to buy art.
But
so if you're looking to buy art, go and check out the platform and see the amazing artists that John's got there.
That's where we are. And then, Instagram, we're at Cosimo.Art online. And for me personally, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. Yeah, search John Sewell and I'm sure you'll see my mug pop up somewhere. So, yeah.
Well, dude, I just want to say thank you again for being on the Creative Nowhere Land podcast. I think you've given us some wonderful insights for a specific group of people that hopefully are going to take away lots from it of things they can do moving forward. And like you say, check out Cosimo to be another platform that potentially they can sell their art through.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Mate, legend. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for listening to the Creative Nowhere Land podcast. If you found anything inspiring or useful in this episode, please consider subscribing or maybe sharing the episode with a friend. Anything you can do to help promote and support Creative Nomaland is so beneficial, and I really appreciate it. Check out the website and sign up to the newsletter to be the first to know of everything that's going on here in Creative Nomaland. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, explore, inspire, and create.
Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And so, therefore, it's so important to consider this question: what do I desire?